Who is behind Hong Kong's recent violence? That's a crucial question. While Hong Kong residents held a rally to support police in fighting against the riots and violence, some external forces become more active as the U.S. State Department admits that diplomats met with Hong Kong separatists, after several U.S. political figures also met with Hong Kong separatists in recent months. So what's behind the alarming cycle of violence? What is the Chinese central government's latest stance on Hong Kong issues after an important conference was held in Shenzhen? And what can be done to address the turmoil and make the so-called Pearl of the Orient shine again? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined in the studio by Professor Leo Fan from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. We will also speak to Mr. Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation, and Starry Lee Wai Kin, chairperson of Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong via satellite, and also Mr. Xiao Geng, president of the Hong Kong Institution for International Finance in Seattle via Skype. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Pan Dong. Victor, let's talk about the situation in Hong Kong. Saturday is a big day for local residents to show their support for the Hong Kong police, which has been dubbed as Asia's finest. Now I understand you're a permanent resident of the Hong Kong SAR. So during your stay in there, during your years of work experience there, what's your impression of the Hong Kong police, and what do you make of Hong Kong people's support for the police?
Well, in my judgment, the Hong Kong police force is probably one of the best police forces in the world, not only in Asia, and it's known for its transparency, for its law-abidingness, and also for its efficiency and effectiveness. Traditionally, Hong Kong police is esteemed by people of all walks of life in Hong Kong, and this time, during this 10 weeks of great turmoil in Hong Kong police force is subject to huge pressure, and there is a lot of undue condemnation of the Hong Kong police, to the extent, for example, even the finger of a police officer was bitten off, and a lot of defamations were labeled against the police officers. Therefore, I would say in this overall context, today's rally in support of the police force is not only very timely, but also highly necessary, because Hong Kong cannot survive as a democracy without rule of law. And if you want to keep rule of law, you cannot have an ineffective police force. So we need a strong police force to be an effective pillar of the rule of law in Hong Kong, to protect the legitimate interests of everyone in Hong Kong.
So talking about rule of law, Professor Liao, you are a professor of law. What do you make of Hong Kong police's performance in dealing with the recent riots in the city?
In general, I think they have been very restrained, even when facing with those quite violent behavior. I mean, when facing those guys who use laser lights into your eyes, and those who even bite your finger, and those who throw those bombs into the legislature building or the police bureau. I mean, they have been performing very restraintly and very in conformity with their duty and their, I would say, discipline. And so, all in all, they have been behaved like what Victor said, very qualified and very professional. I think they deserve to be praised, and we should support them for their, long-standing role in this activity.
So for more on the Hong Kong perspective, now let's talk to Ms. Lee Wai Kin, chairperson of Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong via satellite. So Ms. Lee, first of all, what's your party's stance on Hong Kong police performance and your support for the police force in Hong Kong?
Well, I will look at the police performance in three aspects. First aspect is the police officer in the front line. The second aspect is the management team. The third aspect is their overall strategy. Well, I have a lot of chance to talk to the frontline officer. They are now facing tremendous pressure, and because of all these violent and procession have been happening in Hong Kong for more than 2 months now. They are really tired, and they don't want all this to continue to happen. In face of the assault, humiliation that faced by the frontline officer, I would say they demonstrate a very restrained approach to enforce law and order. I think their restraint can be viewed before the eyes of the whole world. I would like to thank for their hard work and understand, and would like to express our appreciation to help Hong Kong society to restore peace and order. The second part is the management level. It seems to us that the management team is quite hesitate in disparaging the crowd. You know, when the crowd start together, usually it takes over several hours before the police will enforce their action, will enforce their right to restore order. Of course, they may have to consider different things like the specific situation in that sport or scenes. The second may be their manpower. The third is the overall strategy. I would say at the beginning, you know, the police seems to approve every procession, which is not a good preventive way, you know, because we now see that every procession or every similar procession will usually be resulted in violent attack. The police should, you know, rethink their strategy. Now I can see that the police have tightened their approval process and reject some of the potential, prevent some potential violent attack from happening. I hope with the revised strategy, the situation will improve.
So how do you understand the Chinese central government's latest stance on Hong Kong issues after that important conference held in Shenzhen recently?
I think to the society as a whole, to me, the message are crystal clear. That is, all the violence in Hong Kong should be put to a complete halt, and we cannot allow or tolerate any more violent attack, because all these violent attack will bring Hong Kong to a destructive state. And this is the first message. The second message, of course, is in order to restore peace and order, the central government, the Hong Kong government, support the police to enforce laws and order, and to restore peace as soon as possible. And the third message is also very clear to most of the Hong Kong citizens. The central government will continuously to support the Hong Kong SAR government to restore peace and order and to move the Hong Kong society forward, because this issue has been dragged on for like 2 months, and it is time that we should focus on other issues, because Hong Kong itself got a lot of issues wait to be dealt with.
So Carrie Lam, Chief Executive of Hong Kong SAR, has announced the administrative meetings will resume on August the 13th. Regarding the current circumstances, what's your party's plan to put order back into Hong Kong society, and how will you further engage younger generations in Hong Kong?
The whole society needs to move forward. With DAB as one of the major political parties in Hong Kong, of course, we will play our role. We will set up a number of roundtable discussions. We will invite government officials and different stakeholders to attend. As I've mentioned, and a lot of residents do share the same view, Hong Kong should not be put on a hold because of one single issue for more than like 2 months, right? We should move forward. Therefore, and when we look at the root cause of this type of disturbance, I would say we have to push the government to solve or tackle the structural issue of Hong Kong. One of the objectives of all this roundtable meeting is to discuss how we should facilitate and solve this structural issue of Hong Kong, like the limited land supply with high housing price, all these things.
Thank you very much, Ms. Astari Lee Wai-kin, Chairperson of Democratic Alliance for the Betterment and the Progress of Hong Kong. And for more on perspectives from Hong Kong, let's now cross live to Mr. Lawrence Ma. He's a barrister and chairman of Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. So, Mr. Ma, talking about police Hong Kong police has been doing hard work in dealing with riots. So a big question is, what will happen next to those rioters?
Well, they will be prosecuted, definitely. The police have already arrested some 400 protesters. Before the full frontal arrest, the priority of the police was to avoid bloodshed, and then the tactic was to disperse them away so that they won't come back. But the problem of dispersing away, they keep coming back, and the only method or the only way or strategy to end this permanently is to have them arrested and prosecuted. That's a result. As a result, you can see that in the past 2 or 3 demonstrations or riots, many people have been arrested and brought to court and charged. Now that actually has a very detrimental effect or negative effect or impact on the riots. So it is good that these offenders are charged and arrested and prosecuted.
So let me refer you to 2 curious examples. For example, first is the police discovery of that bomb factory in Hong Kong, and the suspect was released on bail quite soon, and also that student leader from the Baptist University who's holding, high energy laser beaming guns and was released without a precondition. What's the legal circumstances there? Well,
whether the court is going to grant bail to a suspect depends on whether that person has the opportunity or intention to be offended. All right. In that case, we're talking about Mr. Chen Ho-tin, who is a separatist and who was in his possession or command a number of explosive Fung in his possession. Now, it would be unlikely for him to, in a short time, to actually gear up all the supply again. So he was released on bail. But for those rioters who had been demonstrating, charging against the police almost every week, they should be charged and bail not be granted. And so far as we understand, there has not been bail granted to those rioters.
So, Mr. Ma, you've been quite vocal about all those foreign interventions in Hong Kong affairs, maybe through your career in the city. So let's get back to the big question of this program today. Who is behind Hong Kong's violence? What's your observation?
Now, anecdote saying is that we now discover that it is not just the United States that's behind the scene. It is because the United States sends the CIA here, train those people, direct them on the ground, how they should position and charge against the police. That's the CIA's training. And the Western United States media in full support of those rioters, calling them freedom fighters. But that's only one aspect of the thing. The most important aspect is Taiwan. We have anecdotal evidence to suggest that because of Tsai Ing-wen's actually degrading support since the last election in Taiwan, she has to think of a strategy. And there was anecdotal evidence, of course, saying that there has been 600 million Hong Kong dollars from Taiwan being used to rent and to financially support these rioters. They pay them, say, for example, $10,000 for the front lines who actually throw bricks onto the police, and $3,000 Hong Kong for those who are at the rear in support. Now, those money have been spent. And Taiwan, and some of the about 30 rioters actually fled to Taiwan seeking asylum. And the person who benefit most politically from Hong Kong's riot is Taiwan. Because Taiwan people is saying, no, that there should not be any one country, two system now in Taiwan. And the winner at the moment is President Tsai Ing-wen.
Well, Mr. Mark, we'll be getting back to you on this. So, Victor, it looks like there's a vicious triangle that's inciting the recent violence in Hong Kong, as Mr. Ma just mentioned, separatist forces from Taiwan, US political intervention, and also Hong Kong's local separatist forces. What do you make of this foreign intervention, and how should it be dealt with?
Well, first of all, on the surface, the situation in Hong Kong is very complicated. You know, the Western side keeps saying that there is no single leader of this massive movement.
That's impossible.
And there is no structure for it. It's all spontaneous. It's all by the people, and they call them freedom fighters or protesters, for example. But the more you peel it off, the more you look into the inside, then holy cow, you really see a lot of money flow into Hong Kong, supporting some of these rioters and anarchist movements. And the goal now, it's more and more clear, is against the Hong Kong government, is against the one country, two system principle and practice, and against the basic law, and it's aimed at regime change. It's very similar to what happened in many other countries or regions or cities.
And do you think that's exactly why former WHO head Margaret Chan called it a color revolution in Hong Kong?
Absolutely. This is the alarming thing, and the people in Hong Kong, including many of the people who participated in the demonstrations or the protests, should realize that they may be used as pawns by evil forces which are aimed at overturning the legitimate government in Hong Kong and dealing vital and fatal blows to the Hong Kong as a international financial center, and eventually the people will suffer all the bad consequences. Jobs will be gone, and capital will take the flight, for example, and eventually Hong Kong may end up as a very fragmented, very much involved in infighting against each other, and the business opportunities will all vanish from Hong Kong. So this is the dire prospect that the people in Hong Kong should realize that they are faced with. And we need to do everything we can to bring back rule of law and to bring back the vitality for Hong Kong as an international financial center and as a very important business center in Asia, but also in the world.
Professor Leo, you are an expert in international law. Looking at U.S. Intervention in Hong Kong affairs, how many international laws has the United States breached?
First of all, I mean, what the lady, Julie, Yide or Yade, I'm not sure, what she has done, I would say, is totally inconsistent with international law and international committee. Because in this very...
But U.S. State Department says it's absolutely normal for U.S. diplomats
it's normal.
to meet with opposition leaders all around the world.
And
That's
she said, quote,
right?
American diplomats meet with former government officials. We meet with opposition protesters, not just in Hong Kong, China. This literally happens in every single country. How arrogant this is. I would say we are not discussing normal situation. We are discussing this kind of disturbance, upheaval, or even we can say it's a riot. And in this very critical moment, you as a political, counselor in the general consulate, you meet with the separatist leader,
Joshua Wong.
And you said, no, it's just normal. I mean, this is totally against what we should do, in terms of international committee, international law, because this is what signal you are sending to Hong Kong people and what signal you are sending to the world. And I would say it's very interesting that what those U.S. media or this Western media are talking about this thing. I just read a news from Washington Times, a piece of news, and in quoting the words from the spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus, that China is a thuggish regime to sort of letting out the information about this diplomat. And this whole news talked nothing about what it means in this critical moment for American political political persons to meet with Hong Kong separatist leader, and they just criticized how rude, how so-called thuggish, China is to letting this information out. And at the end of this news, this is a very, I would say, very irritating sentence. The People's Republic is lawless criminal state. It does not belong in the community of nations.
Sounds like, it's not talking about China, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Very,
so,
very
and
weird.
Back to Hong Kong, it's very unfortunate that a large portion of people who took part in the recent riots are actually young students and younger generations. And for more on that, let's talk to Professor Xiao Geng, President of the Hong Kong Institution for International Finance. He's in Seattle right now. Professor Xiao, you taught in Hong Kong for quite some years, talking about the education, especially higher education in Hong Kong. Do you think something has gone seriously wrong?
Well, I think in Hong Kong, the students from overseas and from Europe particularly, they actually had better understandings about the one country, two systems. And the local students, however, they enjoyed very much the one country, two systems, but I don't think they have a good education understanding about what one country really means. So that is one factor. And the other is that the Hong Kong students, they do under tremendous pressure in economic terms, because they, I remember their salaries in the last 20 years has not changed much when they graduate. But the housing prices, all those increased tremendously several times. So they are frustrated, they in economic terms. And so it is very easy to trigger their angry. And I think, this is the background of the students in the situation.
Now, you are also the president of the Hong Kong Institution for International Finance. We know that Hong Kong is a major international hub for finance. How serious is the damage the recent riot has caused to Hong Kong as a financial hub?
Well, it is very serious, but I think the damage should be contained if the order is restored. Because Hong Kong as an international financial center is so free, so open, and behind this free and open is the stability, the law and order. So without law and order, we cannot achieve anything we achieved in the last 40 years. So I think the financial communities are extremely concerned, and but on the same time, a lot of people are still confident the order will be restored because, we have so many, good, just like what the central government has done, in the last few days. I think it is essential, just like any other financial centers like Wall Street, the experience of Occupy Wall Street in the past, but eventually the order will be restored. So I think it was very, very bad what happened in the last few days, last few weeks, actually months, and nobody really expected what happened. But I think Hong Kong Financial Center has experienced a lot of crisis in the past, and I think with one country, two systems back in Hong Kong, the order will eventually be restored.
Thank you very much, Professor Xiao Geng in Seattle. Now, Victor, Professor Xiao just mentioned the importance of really understand the meaning of one country, two systems policy in Hong Kong. What do you make of the implementation so far?
Well, I think there are different aspects. From the Chinese central government's perspective, it has been sticking to the one country, two system to the hilt in terms of the spirit as well as the provisions of the law. Now, some people may even say that China has been observing the one country, two system too much, because China has been staying away from day-to-day operations of Hong Kong, leaving all the responsibilities to the Hong Kong SAR government. And why? Because the central government really want to be very strict in terms of observing the provisions of the one country, two system. Now, from the Hong Kong SAR government's perspective, I think it's also doing a very good job in doing its duty, doing its performance very much to the requirements of the one country, two system. And ever since 1997, Hong Kong has been coming through quite a few major financial crises, for example, and it has survived. It has done relatively well. Now, this round, for the last 10 weeks or so, I think there is a deliberate attempt to challenge the one country, two system. There is a direct attempt to attack the one country, that is both Hong Kong and mainland China are part of China, the People's Republic of China, for example. And there are people who are very clear in their desire to chant or pursue so-called Hong Kong independence, for example, or free Hong Kong, as if Hong Kong is not free. And this is the dangerous sign. And I think the Hong Kong SAR government and the Chinese central government should really unite all the resources together to put an end to such an attempt to violate the one country, two system principle for Hong Kong.
And talking about putting an end to this violation and violence, Professor Liao, let me refer you to a recent editorial from the Global Times newspaper. It said a bunch of traitors to the Chinese nation in contemporary times have emerged in Hong Kong. So under the one country, two systems principle and policy, is there any way to deal with those traitors?
I think we need to make sure one thing, what one country, two system means. Actually, the Constitution of the Republic of China, Article 31, specifies that the central government, the state, when necessary, may decide to establish special administrative region. What does that mean? The power of SAR, the power of Hong Kong, comes from the central government, not the way around. It's not like a federal system. Your power is vested by the central government, and it's possible that we can take it if necessary. If necessary. So we must make this very clear. One country is the foundation of two systems. And also, the basic law, Article 18 of the basic law, makes it very clear that usually national laws, except those specified in Annex 3 of the basic law, do not apply to Hong Kong. But in such extreme situations where those activities, those disturbances, sort of threats the national security, the public order, then the National People's Congress may decide to announce a state of emergency, and the central government may decide by issuing an order to apply those national laws to Hong Kong.
Well, thank you very much. Time is short for discussion now. Thank you very much, Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai and Professor Leo Van Dar. That's it for this edition of Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Pan Dong in Beijing. Bye-bye.